Hello and welcome. We here at WENY are profiling the candidates of the New York 23rd Congressional District race. Joining me now, Congressman Nick Langworthy's Democratic challenger, Tom Carle. Tom Carle, a newcomer to the political scene. He's a former businessman. Tom, first question to you. For people who may not necessarily know who you are, give us a little bit of your life story.
Well, actually, I grew up in Binghamton, New York, and actually Conklin, a little town out there, Susquehanna Valley schools, and then I went to Broome Community College. Transferred to Geneseo, and then did some time also at Rochester Institute of Technology after I started working. But I kind of got into food and beverage manufacturing and with General Foods and Birdseye in the Avon, Geneseo area. And then one thing led to another. I ended up doing some self-employment for 13 years, but most of my experience has been in food and beverage manufacturing and managing that. I had a couple lucky breaks. I ended up becoming a corporate human resource guy. I've negotiated contracts with unions. But my claim to fame was always cutting wasteful spending and going into manufacturing facilities that needed some help. They were losing money, needed a turnaround, and the last 5 sites I went to before I retired were places that needed help. They were in the hole, a few $1 million. They had yield losses and inefficiencies and labor disputes, and that was became my forte, is going in and making sick plants better.
Yeah, would you say that's kind of your proudest accomplishment in private life, and can you take any of those lessons with you to Congress if you are elected? Well,
I think that there's no one in Congress that I've seen that has the experience that I have, with, correcting inefficiencies, deficiencies, getting along with labor, getting discretionary effort out of workforces, bringing people together, training, workplace safety. There's just even environmental concerns. I just don't see anybody in there that knows what I know. And especially my opponent, when I look at what his work record is, he's really never gotten his hands dirty. He's always been in politics or clerking for someone. He really doesn't know what I know about industry, and I believe that will allow me to bring jobs and opportunities to people in the 23rd District that he couldn't even dream about. I mean, I think he's doing the best he can do, but that's not the best that I can do.
Yeah, a lot of political pundits rate this race as a solid Republican race. Many of them say Congressman Nick Langworthy is very safe in his seat. A Democrat, hasn't won this area since 2008. What makes you think you can be the first candidate in a long time to turn this area blue?
Yeah, and that's exactly what it is, because really it's so safely Republican that Republicans forget about it. They don't do anything with this district. They don't bring projects here. Almost anything that you see my opponent go to where it's a ribbon cutting or he's congratulating people on getting the monies, he hasn't voted for it. I mean, if it's the American Rescue Plan or the Inflation Reduction Act or CHIPS Act or anything that comes up, he wasn't there when they were voted on, and Republicans solidly voted against it. If this district really would like to have an opportunity to grow and progress, move forward, and we've done a lot in this district, even with what we have, you need to get someone who can align with state government, like myself, someone who looks at everybody as, every voter. Whether you're Republican, Independent, Democrat, Green Party, there's something for you with the Carle candidacy that can help District 23, because I'm a person for everyone. Middle of the road, I track a little to the right on some of the surveys that I've taken, because I'm someone who cuts wasteful spending. I know how to turn plants around. I'm also a responsible gun owner, hunter, outdoorsy kind of guy. Grew up in basically in the southern tier. Sometimes this district catches Broome County a little bit, but right now it doesn't. But I'm from the area, I live in the area, I have a lot of skin in the game on a lot of things where, like let's say women's reproductive rights. I have 4 daughters and 5 granddaughters. I want the best of reproductive health care for them throughout their life, no matter what. And I don't want it to be limited. I feel like I have to stand up and defend democracy against, Donald Trump, Project 2025, and my opponent is in lockstep with him. He's endorsed and endorsed back. And, I don't want, like when Donald Trump actually said, about John McCain years ago, he likes his heroes not captured. I like my endorsements to come from non-felons and non-insurrectionists. I want to make sure that our country is going in the right direction. So I'm going to do everything I can to unseat my opponent, return us to a majority of Democrats in the House so we can actually legislate and get things done. The chaos, gridlock, corruption that you see in the House of Representatives has got to go. We have to put people in there who are serious, sober, and want to get things done, and I'm someone who gets things done.
Yeah, let's talk about life on the campaign trail for you. What has it been like to meet with voters and hear their issues firsthand, and what kind of issues are you hearing from them?
Well, a lot of times, the people I'm meeting, they're frightened to death about a second Trump administration. They know that that would spell trouble for them, whether they're on Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, SNAP, they're a veteran and their benefits, whether it's women's reproductive care, whether it's the environment, rolling back environmental regulations. In fact, my opponent has one signature bill of his where he's rolling back the environmental regulations on dishwashers. I mean, seriously, if you would do that, what else are you going to do? I mean, my whole career has been about manufacturing and environmental concerns being intertwined with our bottom line. Every facility that I've ever been part of the management of, we found a way of recycling, reusing, reducing water, chemicals, plastics, corrugated. I mean, there is a market for it out there, and if you try, you can do things for the environment while you're also promoting the bottom line in manufacturing. So I just think they're so far on the other side of science, on the other side of history, on the other side of, American public opinion, that even though it's safely Republican, most people would want to get things done and see a difference maker get in the position to help them and look past the 16 years of Republican representation and maybe go with someone different this time.
Yeah, let's say you are elected January 1st, you're sworn in. What's the first issue that you're tackling?
Well, if I was elected, it means we've already corrected the defending democracy. So let's go back and let's codify Roe v. Wade or something similar to it to protect women's reproductive rights going forward. Let's also work on the border and immigration and make sure that we have a good immigration reform. We need to do a lot of things about immigration. And I think I would be tough but humane on the border. I understand the way we have the border going right at the moment, and not everyone's happy about it, and we feel like there's too many people who are gotaways or whatever in our country. But I would be firmly in the camp of we let the people in who we want in and who should be in here, really truly seeking asylum. But we would have a process by where we could adjudicate their cases quicker than we can now. And part of that bipartisan bill of 6 months ago would have added judges and been able to expedite the process for them. But I would also keep out the people who shouldn't be here. It's as easy as closing the door. If we need to close the door for a little while and get our ducks in a row and make sure we have everybody who's in here already processed, I would be for that. I know a lot of people who are from Mexico, Guatemala, Central American countries. I mean, I speak a little Spanish. My wife is a Spanish teacher. I have an affinity for people from that area of the world. And I would hate to see us do something that we wouldn't want to have done to ourselves. Like, let's say, our country has troubles and our people would want to go to Canada and Mexico, and people would stop them at the border when they're seeking asylum from something that would be harsh here. I think we should be looking at ourselves as good global citizens, make sure we're doing the right thing with people, but we shouldn't have gang members or people who would be part of cartels in our country. We should make sure that we keep those people out. And anybody who's here that shouldn't be here, we can deport them. But mass deportations and taking out families and separating families, I mean, that inhumanity there's no place for that in America.
Yeah, let's talk about the economy now. Over the past 40 years, we've seen a ton of businesses and manufacturing sites leave this area, leave this district. Is there anything that you're planning to do about this, or is our local economy just facing a fundamental shift that we need to adapt to those losses?
Okay, I really believe, because I've worked for companies not only in New York, but around the world. I mean, not around the world, but at least around the nation. Well, and, I've worked in Mississauga, I've worked in Brantford, Ontario, I've worked in Minneapolis and Chicago. I've represented people in Pennsylvania, Virginia, Dallas area of Texas. I mean, I've trained people in the UK, and what I'll tell you right now is the quality of people in New York State and our facilities are, as good as anybody's. And what we really need to do is get someone else like myself who will basically be holding up a sign that says we're open for business. I'm not only a self-employed, entrepreneurial type person, but I've also worked in the corporate world long enough. I know what attracts them. I know they like a good trained workforce. They want workplace safety. They want high quality work. With the CHIPS Act bringing all the jobs that are coming up to North Central New York State, for us to have an offshoot of that or have affiliated businesses or to do something more with the businesses that we already have that are in New York, I think those kind of things will all bring it together. Having someone like me who actually not only goes into a factory for a photo shoot, but actually can sit with the staff and listen to their presentation and maybe offer them some advice or a connection that could help their business has got to be a plus. I won't be just walking into factories. Anybody who would invite me, I would go and sit with them. Could bring other efficiency or waste experts or someone environmental with me and actually help them with their bottom line, help them with their retention, help them with their training. I just think no stone unturned by this guy myself, who is a worker. I started out as a Teamster. I've worked my way through organizations. I've managed a lot of different, let's say 4 or 5 different companies in multiple sites. I've had workforces that had 42 countries represented in the workforce. I've been around and I've been successful almost everywhere I went because I listen to people. They usually have the answers. We incorporate them through continuous improvement principles. I just think that Tom Carle in District 23 could turn out to be a real boom for a number of businesses and possibly turn things around. Most of the customers that we dealt with when I was working in third-party manufacturing would bring their business to us because at one of the sites that I would manage, we would get the quality up. We'd get the workplace safety up. People would be pleasant. Our place would be hygienically, manicured and sanitary, and people would bring their business to us. More volumes and more volumes, more people employed. I think it's really one of those, perspectives that I have always worked and have been successful in managing other people's businesses that I can actually help District 23 do the same.
Yeah, at a recent campaign event in Elmira, your opponent called for an extension of Trump's tax cuts and an end to Biden's economic policies. What do you see that doing to the economy if that were to pass?
Well, I always go back to the Trump tax cuts, where there was an unwarranted tax cuts after 75 months of continued GDP growth under the Obama economic policy. And really, when those taxes, that was actually the trigger, or one of the beginnings of a trigger that didn't manifest for a year or two, of the current economic and inflationary situation that we saw ourselves get into after the pandemic. Trump's policies, economically are nowhere near what the current Biden economic policy is, where we're building from the bottom up and the middle out. There's infrastructure improvements, there's money for industry, there's money for people to pull their roads and their bridges together. And a lot of that work, I've been traveling Route 86 a lot lately, and you'll see bridges being worked on, you'll see, overpasses being worked on. You go into cities, there's more money for people to do, whatever they need to do in their municipalities and on their roads. So what Biden actually recommended and has put forth is benefiting us. That's why our economy is good, even though it doesn't feel good, because we still have some of the inflationary, effects from post-COVID and the response to, the bounce back. But if you go back to when people say, well, geez, things were cheaper under Trump. Well, Trump also had a lot of the metrics were clouded by the fact that the pandemic caused no demand and high supply. The tariffs that he put in place on China and other imports actually raised the price of goods to us. That was one of the beginnings. The trade war with China, and then the supply chains broke down during the course of the pandemic for a number of different reasons. You can't put that all on him. But what we ended up with when we bounced back was high demand and low supply, and that's caused a lot of the inflation. But when it comes down to inflation, who actually raises the prices? It's not the President of the United States. It's not the people who are, doing the economic policy. What it is, it's the suppliers and the manufacturers raise their prices. They see a window of opportunity to recoup some of their losses, and they raise the prices. If you take the fact that we had the high demand that usually triggers in a capitalist society of raising prices. It always does. It creates inflation. That's part of the reason why when you go back to where we're normalizing, it took a little while. Everybody had cash in their pocket from the stimulus packages to try to make sure that we had a soft landing instead of a recession. So when people have money in their pocket, high demand, they're going to be able to go out and purchase the goods that they want, but there was low supply because the supply chains have been affected by the policies of Trump and the pandemic. So I think it's all kind of natural where this economy, the inflation is down around 2.5% or 2.4 now. And I think, we still have 10 million jobs out there that we could fill, but we have 4% unemployment. We've had that for almost 3 years. So with the stock market as high as it is, jobs plentiful, unemployment low, I think we're getting there. I mean, inflation is down to 2.4, 2.5%. So, but it all came naturally, but the prices of the Trump administration and things that people look at is a little bit of a misnomer because there was no demand in that time.
Yeah, let's turn now to rural healthcare access. It's something you focused on in your campaign a lot. It's also an issue that's been taken up by Democratic Vice Presidential nominee Tim Walz. What is your plan to ensure better and greater access to health care and emergency care here in New York 23rd?
Well, as a humble candidate, not having talked to any of the CEOs or the people who control, health care in our district, what I see is an opportunity for us to try to increase and improve access. It's also one of those things that I have skin in the game because I have personal experience with members of my own family having to go to ERs to get diagnoses, and then you go to multiple ERs and then you have trouble getting to a specialist, and then quite possibly you can't get into your primary. And I think that's probably systemic throughout our region because we have rural, smaller hospitals. We have a lot of, rural inhabitants that it's not like you can, where I live in Fredonia, in a half hour I can get up to where all the medical facilities and specialists you want in the world are there. But in the town I live in, it's kind of limited. And I think what we need to do is make sure it's attractive for new doctors and specialists to go to small towns, whether it's a day or two a week or whatever. But the reason they aren't in the small towns is that's not where the money is. So they work out of, most of the hubs, whether it's Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, Binghamton. It's hard to get it over here in the southern tier where we live. And I think it will be a focus. I don't know all the answers to it, but I'm willing to go and inquire, investigate, research, and make sure that we have something, because rural healthcare needs to be better than it is.
Yeah, you were recently on a podcast with Michael Cohen, Trump's former fixer. You talked about a story in which you lost your brother and son-in-law to drug abuse in the opioid crisis. Talk a little bit about that, and also what could be done to help those people.
Well, that's one of the things I say I have skin in the game when it comes to substance abuse and doing something about it. Because it's a multifaceted problem. Number one, people get hooked on drugs a lot of times just when they have an accident or an injury, or they're coming off of surgery, and before they know it, they are, dependent on it. I think, not only in combination with, having physicians write the right prescriptions and use alternate, methods and medications, we also have to have some kind of early intervention. We need to have better treatment programs, counseling. I think that, you see that they have the antidote for opioid being more widely prescribed or allowed to be in different places, and people who don't have medical degrees can actually administer it, now in ambulances and police, the police are armed with it. Because we have way too many overdoses, and with the onset of fentanyl into the system, that has made it so it's so much more deadly, even though it's really addicts usually they end up bumping into fentanyl because people are cutting, the drug dealers are, cutting it with different things. And I think what we need to do is a combination of things where we have good law enforcement, we make sure our rules are what they need to be, we need to tighten up the border on all of that. The one bipartisan bill had more fentanyl detection equipment, as part of the bill, for the border. I think all of those things tightening up so we have less supply, then we have doctors and, medical care, actually having good treatment programs and, monitoring their patients so that they know what they have. And then it's actually getting people in the programs and making sure that they're doing everything that they can, because it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's not a one thing, a broad stroke you can do and fix it, because it's different everywhere in the country, and I think every demographic.
Yeah, let's talk about veterans issues now. We here at WNY recently spoke with a veteran who served his country and now feels pushed aside by the VA, the very organization meant to serve him. What are you doing to reach out to disenfranchised veterans who feel pushed aside by the system, and what can you do to address their problems?
Yeah, two of my closest buddies growing up are veterans, and I would say both of them have let me know about some of the problems and some of the things that actually were good about their VA experience. And I would say that, those guys who are coming back with long chronic problems, whether it's PTSD or they're carrying shrapnel around with them, or they have lost a limb, a lot of times they can get certain types of care, certain places, and where their proximity is to the VA administration outlets, but sometimes they have to travel for it. And I know that, a friend of mine in Binghamton, for a lot of his care, he had to go to Philadelphia for it. So it isn't everything that we would like it to be. And I think, between the VAs that I know that are in the Batavia and Bath and a couple locations, whatever we can do to fortify it, we need to make sure they have the right kind of doctors. And I also would think that, veterans should be able to, extend their benefits to primary care physicians and hospitals close to them so they don't have to travel so far. But definitely, I want to focus on the fact that people who've done their time and defended our country and served us well, they need to be able to come back and get the best treatment possible. I mean, it shouldn't be anything but the best, and I will always stand with them with that and try to improve those conditions, and their access. And, it should be at no cost already, but we need to improve the access, and it gets back to like rural health care. I mean, it's hard to improve the access for veterans when we're not even getting it for everybody else either. And so I think that whole thing needs to be revamped, and to the point where it's not always so much for profit. Sometimes it's for the care of the people and where they live.
Yeah, on the ballot this year here in New York is Proposition 1. It's a constitutional amendment to codify abortion rights and protections based on race, gender, creed, sexual orientation, and more into the state's constitution. You say you're pro-choice. What's your take on the amendment?
Well, I think it's definitely someone that helps everybody who's marginalized and protects freedoms. I think there's, no doubt about that we need to make that part of the state constitution, and I wholeheartedly support it. But then again, I know like my opposition, they don't support certain things because they kind of want to marginalize some people and cut people out of society. But really, I want something that's all inclusive. I believe in the diversity as a strength. I believe that, America as a melting pot, as I grew up, we always used to brag about that our diversity was one of the things that, actually, we labeled ourselves that way. And now, with the southern border being what it is, we've kind of turned a little bit. We need to get control of immigration. We need to make sure that that's okay. We need to, and while we're at it, let's make sure we fix the thing for the dreamers. Let's get that off of our plate. Those people were actually, have lived, worked, and educated themselves in our country. They've known no other country. Let's fix that. But let's tighten up the borders. I know that my opponent also looks at the northern border, and he sponsored a bill that would do something about the northern border, but all he wanted to do was surveil it. From my perspective, when you have a problem or you think you have a problem, you actually take action. We add agents, we would fund, we would do more for it rather than just go, okay, we're going to take a look at it. It's a big problem, but let's just look at it. I'm more in the camp of, it's a big problem, let's actually break it down, analyze it, and then let's do something about it. But when you put the whole thing together about Proposition 1, I'm all for it.
Yeah, let's talk about immigration now. Last year we saw an influx of migrants into the U.S. all coming through the southern border. A lot of them were bused here to New York City, and several of our counties in New York 23rd quickly issued executive orders that banned migrants from being sent from New York City upstate to here to New York 23rd. From our reporting, we haven't seen any immigrants being housed in hotels here. Border crossings also down this year as opposed to last. Is this still an issue in your mind, and how should we fix it?
Well, I think we've got a Band-Aid on it for the moment with the presidential executive orders that he's issued on the border. But it has to be immigration really is a result of instability in Central South America and Mexico. And I'm a root cause analysis guy. I always want to like look at things and analyze it, get down to the most minute detail to try to work on things and solve problems so you solve them permanently. Well, you can't really solve immigration if we don't also address the fact that why are these people leaving their countries down there? And I know that in some cases, if you go back a generation, the U.S. was a little bit responsible for some of the unrest that we had down there. And, we need to actually look at that as they are our neighbors. We should do our best to help stabilize them where we can. And I'm sure there's people who are much more well-versed and well-read. And I mean, I'm a humble candidate for District 23, so I don't know all the ins and outs that Homeland Security would know, or, our ambassadors to these countries. But it would seem to me that if we got the right people in a room, we could start going, okay, macro and micro, how are we going to handle this? Are we going to handle it? The big picture is we're going to try to keep people in their countries, and we're going to maybe have the Remain in Mexico reinstituted, and then bring people across and adjudicate at the border like we could if we had more judges and we had places to hold people while we look at their case. There's so many things that we need to do about it, but I'm definitely let's shut the door a little bit while we figure out what we need to do. We get everything in place, and then we can open the door to the number of people that we think we can handle who are here for legitimate reasons, adjudicate their case immediately, and then let's move on. But I think you also have to go to the root cause. Why are they leaving their countries, and what can we do about that?
Yeah, let's talk about, let's go back to this race now. You've called Langworthy a partisan congressman. You've called him a Trump loyalist, someone who's all talk and no action. What will you do different?
Well, you're getting right at it, man.
Better if elected.
Well, the thing is all talk, no action. I'm a hard worker. I've always worked. If you were to ask almost anybody that you ever had contact with, they'd say the guy is a worker. He's going to go and give it his level best day in and day out. And when you look at, the money that we spend in government, I would be someone who would always be looking to cut wasteful spending. I'm someone who always would be pro-industry. I'm pro-entrepreneurial. I'm pro-environment. I'm pro-women, pro-rural access to Medicare. Almost anything you look at, or whether you're a marginalized citizen or you don't feel like you're being heard, I'm someone who's going to listen, and I'm going to bring your issues forward. I just don't think there's any comparison with the work ethic or work experience that I have versus my opponent. I mean, the chances of him being able to bring much business in here, I can't even imagine it, because he hasn't. He's had 2 years. The same old rhetoric is what I hear from him, is that, Trump, the big businessman, is going to do something. Remember the prices we had? Well, I look at it like if you're following someone who has a problem with the truth, and then I guess you're bolstering that by endorsing him, how are we ever going to get anywhere? I mean, the only way we can move forward is through the rule of law, law enforcement, doing legitimate activities, having legitimate behaviors, and rewarding good behavior and good performance. To sit around and complain about things, it's like the border. I think that when you go back to the beginning of the Trump administration, they had the Senate and the House and the presidency, and they did nothing about the border. What they did about the border was separate families. So still, some of those families have never gotten back together. They caused so much strife and chaos. It was inhumane, yet they really never matched the deportations of the Obama administration. Obama was the deporter in chief, but he did it in such a way that no one really complained about it. It seemed like it was humane. Everything was going well. And then Trump had to usurp what Obama had in place. And now he says, well, we aren't, the Biden administration is not doing what he had in place. When you go back, we are now, the crossings are lower than they were ever during the Trump administration. They're lower than what was at the end of the Trump administration now. And that makes it so they're lower than they were even at the Obama administration. So we have the ability to funnel things down, but really it's to Congress to act. The president should not be having to use executive orders to close the border when we could have had a vote on that bipartisan bill that I know they said, well, the limits, daily limits were too high. Yeah, but that was something we could all agree on. It was going to put more judges, more officers at the border, fentanyl detection, and there was other safeguards in there. It should have been voted on, but it was called because they wanted the election issue. So sometimes I think Republicans don't want to solve the border because they always want to have it as an issue that they can run on.
Yeah, you don't like Donald Trump. You made that very clear in your campaign.
Well, what's to like?
You made that very clear in your debate that you had a few weeks ago. What are your concerns if Trump secures a second term in the White House?
Well, number one, Project 2025, because that's just really a playbook for the Trump administration going into it, and that one would, it's going to eliminate, all of the social safety net programs like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, SNAP, veterans benefits. All of those are in jeopardy, but also a woman's right to choose is in jeopardy. And then you take anybody who's marginalized in our society, they're going to have problems with Project 2025. The biggest problem, when Trump was first elected, as a business guy, even though I didn't think he would be good at it because I grew up in Binghamton, so I knew about the shenanigans of his whole life, and his bankruptcies and problems he's had with contractors and laborers and losing his casino. And I mean, I was privy to a lot of that because I lived close. I've always been a news junkie. So I knew it was trouble when I saw him coming down the escalator, but I hoped for the best. I wanted him to do well. I wanted him to show that, someone who had more of a business intellect would probably do well there. But he came right out of the blocks lying about crowd size. And then as you go through the whole presidency, I really can't forgive the insurrection. I can't really forgive the fact that he didn't tell us the truth about the airborne, qualities of the characteristics of COVID-19. He knew it in February of 2020, and it never came out. He never admitted to it until we heard it on tape from Bob Woodward's book in that summer. So how many hundreds of thousands of people passed away because they didn't know that COVID-19 was airborne? He knew it in February, but it never got shared until Bob Woodward's book came out. So when it's that level, you're the president of the United States and you are tight, you know what the truth is, but you don't share it. And then even if you know the truth about like the election, he was told by everybody in his staff that he lost the election, yet he still denies the election. I mean, a month ago he came out, well, I lost by a whisker. He lost. If he admitted he had lost all of this time and not had the insurrection, he'd be a viable presidential candidate again, because he could say, well, the pandemic once in 100 years, or he could say, that pandemic response, I could have done better on that. But when you take the fact that the very, the rule of law that is protecting him now and has kept him out of court and kept him from having to face the charges that he's, in the 5 different jurisdictions, the rule of law that he would eliminate or reduce with another presidency is the very rule of law that's protecting him now. I just hate to see where it would go with him back in there, knowing what he knows now. He wouldn't be surrounded by the generals, like McMaster and, who he had the first time. He'd probably have the Roger Stones and Marjorie Taylor Greens and Jim Jordans and Matt Gaetz kind of people influencing him again and emboldening him. I just can't even imagine what a second Trump presidency would be. And I appreciate you letting me spout that out, because it's so much that I don't know how anybody could vote for him again. I just, he has done everything that he could do to damage the presidency and the wheels of justice and the levers of government, that it just doesn't make sense to put him in there if you treasure democracy and the freedoms that we've enjoyed for most of our lives. I mean, most everybody that I know has benefited by living in this country the way it has been. Our institutions, our rule of law, law enforcement, military service, the economy, the capitalism. I mean, it's all kind of works, but he would throw a monkey wrench in the whole thing, just like he tried to in his first term, but he had guardrails then. He doesn't have guardrails now.
Yeah, what about a Harris administration?
I think when Kamala took over for Joe as a candidate, I felt like a breath of fresh air. She is more than qualified to be, the president of the United States, having been the vice president for 4 years, having been an attorney general, having been a senator. all you have to do is listen to her for a couple minutes, and you know that she can talk with anybody on the world stage. She has the common sense, the intellect, the experience to do whatever we need to have done. She's going to follow the norms of American life. She's going to follow the norms of our law and our rule of law and the Constitution. She's going to respect people's freedoms. She's going to be a president for everybody. And I get that there are people who are, going to say things, because we're a right and left kind of country. But really, you have to look and go, Donald Trump represents the very worst of what our country has seen. And Kamala is nothing but a bright future, hope for the future, hope for all people, respectful, democratic processes.
Yeah, there's a lot of division in this country. A lot of voters
ton.
complain about that. And the presidential race, basically a toss-up as we speak. Let's talk about your opponent, Congressman Nick Langworthy. What's one good thing you can say about him?
Well, I think he's probably, different than he is when he's carrying water for Donald Trump. For him to carry water for Donald Trump and endorse Donald Trump, I don't think he is the person that he really wants to be. I think he probably has the best of intentions, if he was not under a Trump administration and the way the Republican Party has moved that way. I don't think Nick Langworthy is a bad person. I think he is caught up in a right-wing movement that has had him have to compromise his principles, and at least I'm hoping that that's the truth with him. But I see him as, he looks sad to me because I know that he doesn't really believe what he's talking about right now and supporting Trump. I just think that he's probably a good person, and I wish the best for him. And hopefully I am successful in this bid for the congressional seat. I'm sure we'll see more of Nick. I think he'll always have a political career because that's what he's had so far. But I think if those guys win, America loses on a number of fronts, and that's why I'm running. That's why I'm going to give it my all. That's why I'm working as hard as I am, going from one end of the district to the other to try to meet everybody I can to try to turn the tide here, because there's the stakes they couldn't be higher for this election.
Yeah, last question for you. What would a Carle in Congress look like?
Well, I said it earlier, it would be something like open for business. We would probably be able to try to, you don't get a business in here in a minute. But what we can talk about is building the infrastructure, and making sure that we have the STEM and the vocational people to support new industry coming in. We would, you'd have to think about it. It's kind of like the old Chinese proverb, the guy who plants a tree that he knows he'll never sit in the shade of. That's the same thing we would have to do here in District 23, is to get the work going, the infrastructure, the training, the attracting of new business. That takes a while. Companies just don't move from North Carolina back to New York on a whim. There has to be a reason. There have to be talked to about that. But I think when we look at our district, there's so many little things that we could do. I plan on, if anybody would invite me to their small business, I would go in and I would talk to them about that, because I've run some small businesses and I know some things, and go in there and encourage them, try to help them entrepreneurially and with what they're doing if they're trying to expand their business. The corporations and the companies that we have across the district, the ones that are very successful or the ones that are struggling, if they invite me in, I'm going to come in with a team and we'll see what we can do to help them, whether it's other financing or it's, they need some efficiency help or they need a consultant for a while. I don't know, but it would be something that I would invite everyone to talk about with me. I mean, one of the ideas I have is also running something like a congressional, I don't want to say a contest, but a performance review system where, high quality products being made in District 23. Let's have a review of those people, and maybe there's a congressional award that I can develop for District 23. Maybe there's something about workplace safety that I can, inspire people to move forward on and make their workplaces safer. I mean, there's things like that, whether it's efficiency or profitability, workplace safety, continuous improvement, things that I know about industry that actually inspires people to want to work, to be able to be retained by their employer, to bring their business back to New York. There's a lot of businesses here in New York that are doing just fine. How are they doing that? High quality work. New Yorkers can make the best products of anybody that are out there if they want to, and if we actually give them the tools, the training, the education, we put the infrastructure in. I always joke. I said the pre-work gets you the work. So if we actually have things set up, if you build it, they will come, like the Field of Dreams. We need to make sure that we're ready for the opportunities when they arise, because there's nothing worse than saying, well, it'll take us 5 years to train that many engineers in this area. When I watched an interview with Tim Cook, we said, well, the interviewer said, well, why do you still keep so much business over in China? He says, China can supply me with a room full of engineers at a moment's notice. Can we do that over here anywhere besides Silicon Valley or maybe New York City? Probably not. And I think that's where our future is. We have to have people who are STEM trained, engineering, electrical, computer, AI trained. We need to make sure that we're on the cutting edge of that. If you want the work, let's start building the educational system to support that.
Tom Carle, the Democratic challenger for Congress for New York 23rd, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Of course. Now, Election Day, November 5th, WENY will have all the coverage for you right here on WENY.com.